This is the Sophie Scholl Roundtable, where we talk about the two forbidden subjects, religion and politics, on the same show. I'm Mel McGinnis, and to my right is...
Garrett Kane.
And to my left is...
Andy Frudd.
Not that he's a leftist philosophically or politically, but that's the way you're arranged today. And we like talking about the subject of religion and politics, especially important today as we're watching what's going on in the streets of our nation. And last week, Garrett said the quote of the year almost, given the kind of year we're having. Garrett, what was that quote?
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe. Everybody knows George Floyd said that. But when he said that, and the way Garrett has applied that, you see how relevant it is. And Garrett, again, why did you say that quote?
Well, I think it captures a lot of people's emotion, so far this year with one thing after the other, with the COVID crisis and then George Floyd's death. And I think it captures a lot of different situations. We've all had that experience, probably a lot of us for the first time, of having to wear a face mask, whether at work or out in public, and it's not comfortable. And I don't mean to diminish the impact of those words in George Floyd's case, but my initial reaction when I put one on, and I'm sure other people, especially older people or people that have difficulty like asthma, was I can't breathe in this thing. And likewise, I think it's kind of a sort of a metaphor for just the stress of the situations that have been brought on us in society and throughout the world. The lockdown, being caught in our homes. Some people down south that wouldn't be able to afford proper air conditioning, yet they're supposed to stay in their homes, might have a similar thought in that situation of I can't breathe, and I'm possessed by this fear to go outside into a space where I may be able to breathe a little bit better.
I think that's an excellent motif, because as we've been going through this COVID lockdown and watching what's been going on in the streets, I think we've seen freedom be restricted as if freedom would say, I can't breathe, given what's happened to small businesses, especially when you see the hypocrisy of big box stores being open, but mom and pop shops having to remain closed. And in addition to that, Andy, as we discussed after the show last week, came up with something that we need to really discuss, because we're hearing from Black Lives Matter. And as we've been hearing from them and them wanting to have our ear, Andy mentioned something about it which I think the whole society needs to consider. Is it a two-way street? Is it a two-way street? Meaning, is Black Lives Matter willing to listen to what we have to say? Andy, would you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, well, I love what Garrett was just talking about with this whole, I can't breathe. Because I think that while there's the physical aspect of what happened, and we can't diminish that, it was awful. But I think that most people feel at times this I can't breathe. Whether it's financially, whether it's relationally, whether it's socially, whether it's at their work, there's just a lot of pressure that comes down. And I believe that with small business owners. I think your example was great. And the fact is that we need to look at this whole thing from an all perspective. Now, I get that that's not appropriate at this moment, that people don't want to hear the word all. They think that somehow when we say all, we're diminishing African Americans or what they're struggling with, and that's not what's happening. What we're really looking for is understanding. If you listen to what Garrett just laid out, what you saw was understanding. Like let's take this example and try to understand it from a bigger perspective. And there are things within this movement that I think apply to not just African Americans, but to everybody. We all know, we all have felt the knee on our throat from a relationship, somebody who just won't let up. They just keep going, they keep going, they keep going. We've all felt that person who, again, for Black Lives Matters, it's about the police, right? It's about them feeling like the cops are always on them, that are unfair to them. And that could very well be a true statement in some cases. But we've all felt that same thing in other situations. That adversary, that person who has their knee on our throat and they just won't let up at work. And so I think there's a lot of similarities with this whole thing. Specifically, last week, as I listen to you guys talk, and I get to respond after, right? As most people, who are watching this, and I hope that they're learning that you guys want questions, that you want comments, you want concerns to go to. But specifically, I was talking about, again, our African Americans is equally, intrigued by and interested in understanding us.
In what way?
And so specifically, I asked you a couple questions. One of them was, when is the last time that an African American person invited you into their home for understanding? To really get an idea of what it is to be African American. And by the way, vice versa. When is the last time that we did it for understanding? Yeah. Like, again, I keep hearing about culture. And I keep hearing about specifics and do we understand the culture? And one of the things that I brought up to you was the Black Fathers Talk. Yeah. However you put that together, right? This idea that every African American father sits down with their kids and talks to them, has the talk about the police and all of the kind of affirmation. And so I asked you, do they understand that there is a white man's talk? Last night I was talking to my cousin who is a Caucasian. His wife is Korean. He said, did you know there's an Asian man's talk? That his children all look like they are Asian in nature. And he said the same thing that I did when I was explaining to him that, the white man's talk includes things like, hey, you're going to have to understand that there aren't going to be some jobs available to you, even though you're qualified. That you're going to have to understand that there aren't some scholarships. There's not some college opportunities. There isn't some things that you might be qualified for, but because we are about helping restore, affirm African Americans, we have decided that, listen, there's some things that minorities have a leg up on us because we are trying to make things right. And so I've had to explain to my son, that little line on there, you fill out the whole application for a scholarship and then it says, are you a minority? And instantly he knows that his chances of getting that scholarship are less.
And that's a great point, Andy, and I've been reflecting on the talk about the talks. And man, it would be great if we didn't have to have those talks, because I think that those talks, in a sense, maybe just keeping this whole thing going, this separation of races. I would rather see, like you said, let's have these talks together, like going over to your black friend's house and sitting there together, and not necessarily focusing on race, but just getting to know each other. And I'm torn. My boys are young, and I would like to think maybe in the next few years I might decide that maybe I don't do the talk. Instead, I try and find a good diverse group of African American, Asian American, Indian American friends to just integrate them with and let them learn that they are just like us. And that that's where I want to get to, is to where there isn't that talk. There's just that integration. But like you brought up the point, it has to be a two-way street. There has to be concessions and there has to be invitations to come together on both sides, or all 6, 7, 8 sides, however way you want to parse it down into different races.
And in that talk, do we even want to bring up, like Larry Elder does, who says, I don't want to be called an African American. I don't like that. He says, my parents came from Jamaica. They're not from Africa. And call me a black American. That's what he prefers. It's so interesting how we use this language, and I wonder if we use it in ways that's not meant to be received well by those who hear it. I just, again, wondered, how am I using language? I've used the phrase American of African descent to try to stay away from the hyphenation. I just wish we could all be viewed as Americans.
Wasn't that the intent? You know, that we are a melting pot, that was supposed to be, we all are Americans. But I think sometimes in our intent, that it's good in nature, but it had some harm. I think of women, and I think of, are we agreeing that women are equal in the workplace because somebody's telling us to agree, because there are laws that tell us we have to, because there are rules that say we have to look to hire a woman first? Or are we really looking at women and saying they can do the job? And the same thing for African Americans. Have we done some harm with good intentions? When we've set aside all these scholarships and all these job opportunities and made all of these things, have we not really been kind of selling the fact that it's not that they're equal, it's we just have to do this?
Well, yeah, it's still carrying on the division.
Exactly.
As long as we do things like that and recognize the division there, the division will still remain.
Exactly. Are we continuing to carry this on? And I love that thought process, that again, with good intentions. The intentions were, we're trying to help.
Yep.
But instead what we're really selling is, well, we don't know that you're equal or not. We just know we have to do this.
Yeah, and in this attempt to help, are we devaluing meritocracy by having special set-asides for certain groups? The intention is good, but is the means to get there good?
Right.
And I think we have to question the means, as well as question the means of what other people are suggesting, meaning we want to have the same goal. It's just the different means to get to the end. Such as in questions of income inequality. I hear that being talked about, and I said, are we on the same page?
I mean, I think there's some institutional stumbling blocks. I think the war on drugs is a great example, and I bring this up quite a bit, and I don't mean to harp on it, but it creates a stumbling block both for poorer and often minority communities, but I think it also creates a stumbling block for law enforcement, which is a big issue now. A stumbling block that it can turn what would be a good, honest cop into someone very corrupt and very violent. I had a very good friend growing up who was in the Cat County, I guess you'd call it the vice squad. That was his deal. He was the drug guy. He ended up allegedly committing suicide on the Seneca Nation reservation. But he was a Sunday school teacher. He was a father. He was there for his kids, but he had a dark side that just got a hold of him, and I think it was because of that drug war, and both sides get into it, and it ruins both well-meaning cops and what would be well-meaning people. I think it's a huge stumbling block, and I think there's some work to be done on it.
We think when we take away how we get somewhere, how we become someone, and we just put a focus on getting somewhere or being someone, we do a humongous disservice, because we're looking at a culture now who we're not trying to understand each other. One of the things I love about this show and getting to film you guys on this show is there's been a lot of different people sitting in these chairs. And really there is a heart for trying to understand and trying to say that we can disagree, but I can still value you. And really, you may have a point. I just may disagree with it. And I think that we're not seeing that. We're being told right now that if we don't think like everybody else, or like a specific group of people, that somehow we're awful, rotten, terrible people. And so again, you're not getting people to evolve to something. You're just telling people you need to immediately stop thinking this way and start thinking this way and start acting this way. And if you don't, you're a terrible person.
And you have to apologize for it.
Right.
And now opinions can't be expressed or received without a person feeling hurt. Can't we disagree, without that disagreement feeling like it's a hurt.
Well, and I think that, we were talking earlier today with a group of people here, about relationship and people being in family. It used to be more that the people of your church were a family, but also the people in your community. I remember my grandparents talking about, like, listen, in the community, one farmer bought this piece of equipment, one farmer bought this piece of equipment, and this, and then you just went around and you took care of each other.
Yeah.
And it brought about community. But now we're so, everybody is separate, everybody is independent, everybody... And it really hasn't helped. When I need to borrow your piece of farming equipment, I'm going to listen to you a lot more. Mm-hmm. I'm going to listen to things that I might not normally listen to because I have a need for you. But now we have no need for people, so there's no need to listen, and especially to listen for understanding.
Andy, you brought up a great point about community, and that happened in Kayentone. Kayentone is such a tiny town, but there was one farm on the north side and another farm on the south side, and those farmers shared time with one another, helping one another out, and I'm sure they shared equipment, just like you were saying.
Yeah, and I think that we've gotten so far away from that. I think there are people who are longing for that. But most people have no idea how to do that. We live in a world now where how many property lines have some sort of a wall?
Yeah.
I mean, immediately we buy a new home, and what do? We put up some kind of a wall, some kind of a gate. Why? It used to be, the front of homes, but you'd walk out back and it was all one big yard.
Yeah.
And there was baseball and all kinds of things being played.
We're a country of strangers now, and I think the best way I can explain it is that we've lost our local industry and our local job opportunities. So the last 2 generations or so have had to go from their hometowns like similar to how we are here, out into the rest of the world, wherever they can find a job in their field. So instead of having this generational tradition of each generation kind of staying in the area, I think we've kind of just been shuffled around and it's out of necessity too. It's just our economy's different, our culture's different, for better for worse. So.
Yeah, and something in reverse has taken place. I heard Dennis Prager say this. Instead of the family going out to work like they would on the farm, you go out of your house to work or out of your house to get to work. Now, we've made it such that you just stay in your home to work in front of a screen. So you are interacting less and less with people. Is that a good thing?
I think it's funny because I was just telling some people that for the last 3 months as a pastor, it's not been such a bad thing to not have to hear all the little goofiness that goes on in the church world because everybody's kind of sheltered. You're not hearing about this person didn't like this paint and this person wanted new chairs and they didn't like this hymn. And so there's parts of it that you can understand why people would be drawn to, like, hey, listen, a lot of the havoc in my life is brought upon by having to listen to other people.
Yeah.
So I can get wanting to be at home, but at the same time, I think that's part of the problem. Mm-hmm. Is that we're not willing to understand that part of being in relationship with other people is having to put up with, and to understand that we don't think a lot alike, some of us. Yet I still have to be there. Yes. And now we shut ourselves away, and I only have to talk with like people. Mm-hmm. I only go online with like people.
Yep.
And one of the things we want to do here is get somebody in from Black Lives Matter. In fact, we're planning on having somebody come in who basically was a part of it. And to hear his story, I think, will be very interesting as we find out more about one another. And one other story will help us to understand the situation that we're in. And, too, I think as we wrap up here today, I don't think we can help but notice the similarities between COVID and what we're seeing now. And for people to miss that, I'm afraid would leave them in the dark. For example, I think Dennis Prager is right. When you're on the left, you live for hysteria. You go from one hysteria to another. Russia, Russia, Russia. Then here we have COVID, COVID, COVID. Now we have defund the police. you see from one thing to another, it brings that excitement into the left to somehow keep them going. And I feel like that's something we as Americans need to be very attentive to. Anybody else want to share something before we wrap up here?
I think you're right. It's hysteria, it's panic, it's fear, and I was ready with another quote today, even though.
Oh, go ahead.
And it's a short one. It's "Don't panic." It comes from Douglas Adams. He's kind of a comedy parody sci-fi writer of the, I think, early 70s, but it was on the cover of his book The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's kind of he was secular, but when I think back on me reading the book, the premise of it is that there's this book, and the main character, he gets picked up by these aliens because the aliens destroy Earth to make room for like some transgalactic highway or whatever, eminent domain at its finest. But this book is supposedly gets him out of all these tight situations, and the cover is "Don't panic, refer to the book." Well, as Christians, it's nice because we kind of have a hitchhiker's guide to planet Earth.
Yeah, right.
It takes a little bit more work than dialing in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the answer just pops up. But if we get into our Guide to the Earth, there's some answers in there. But I think the phrase "don't panic" applies.
Very good, excellent, Andy.
I don't have a quote for you, but I love that. I love that. That preaches. So, I think that one of the greatest things about Jesus was his ability to have compassion on people. And his compassion came from understanding them. He understood what things were on their neck, what things were weighing them down, what things were really bothering them. And it's those things that brought him understanding. And I think as Christians, we would benefit greatly if, rather than so quickly judging people, rather than being the one that has our knee on people's neck, we were really seeking and searching for understanding. I think it's funny because as people will be watching this, they're going to react. My plea really is react with understanding. Attempt to understand where people are coming from rather than just take phrases and lines and think that somehow we're devaluing people. Because I truly believe, and this is not you guys talking, this is just me, that some of the things that I have seen, read, and heard in the last couple weeks are really devaluing people, the people we're trying to help. We're trying to tell them over and over that their value comes from us saying that they're okay. And that's not where your value comes from.
Mm-hmm.
As I think of a quote, I can't help but go to the Bible. Genesis chapter 3. I think it's verse 20. Adam gave the name of his wife Eve. Why? She was the mother of all the living. Underscore all. It's not that some lives matter. From the scripture rooted in Genesis, we see that all lives matter. And we want to communicate that message. Man being made in the image of God. Though that nature, of course, has fallen because of sin, still, after the fall, what did Adam call his wife? Name his wife Eve, for she was mother of all the living. So with that said, glad you joined us here today for the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. Join us next week as we continue to explore and as we continue to discuss matters relating to religion and politics. And thanks to